if your alternative is being out in the North Sea, trying to scrape a living from the fauna of the ocean, I think I'll take a 6-hour gig any day of the week.
Yeah, agreed.
My wrist is a little bit sore after this.
Versus getting washed out to the ocean.
I have a peg leg, man. I lost it below the knee from a fishing accident.
Hello and welcome to another episode of 1001 Album Complaints. It's the show where lifelong friends, musicians, complainers, and music fans tell the stories behind the albums from the list of the 1001 albums you must hear before you die. We'll give you some history and context on the artist and the album, and then dive into the songs. We'll also be dropping in clips along the way in case you're unfamiliar with the artist or the album. Now, as musicians, we know how hard it is to write and record music, and we've got nothing but respect for anybody who tries, but at the same time, it's also fun to nitpick the things you love, so just a warning, we're probably going to poke some fun at this week's album and band as well. I'm already seeing some grins on the face of the crew here, nothing to make fun of.
No, it's a flawless album from beginning to end. Yeah, no notes.
Now, at the end of all this, we're going to vote on whether you actually need to hear this album before you die, and then we'll randomly select next week's album. Now, we know that you have an endless supply of podcasts that are all vying for your attention, so we want to thank you for choosing to spend some time with us this week. And we're heading to Hollywood for all the glitz and glam of the 1980s. That is, of course, the neighborhood of Hollywood in Birmingham, England, where our story starts. A story about a band whose lead singer told their producer that their music was going to be what you heard when then newly elected President Ronald Reagan started lobbing rockets into Russia. Quote, "We want to be the band to dance to when the bomb drops." Exactly what you'd expect from a genre called New Romantic. My name is Adam. I've been playing music since I was 12 years old, and I've played professionally for over a decade. And today we're talking about the second studio album called Rio by 1980s darlings Duran Duran. So let's play some synth rock of the early 80s. Let's throw it around the studio and get introductions from our crew by way of a tweet-length review of this album. So first, I'm going to throw it over to Marty.
Hey, happy to be back. My tweet-length review is, who the fuck is this bass player and why is he not a household name?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
It might be because it's easy to confuse him with two other members of the band because they share last names.
With the same last name, right? And aren't related, right?
Right,
Yes.
correct.
Yeah.
All right, welcome back, Marty. We're going to throw it over to Tom next.
Thank you, Adam. My tweet-length review is, much like Sirhan did to Bobby Kennedy in the summer of 1968, on Rio, Duran Duran take your expectations of what a fashionable, hunky, modern pop band can achieve out back and shoot it, giving us an occasionally funky, sometimes angular, and often formulaic album that still has enough catchy songs to keep a listener interested. And like Bobby Kennedy, the album has a lot of charm, but also has a few holes.
Oh, God. That's very morbid.
Wow. Well done, Tom. Coming in hot. I like it. All right, everybody. This is Adam. And my tweet is, Duran Duran's album Rio is timeless and a true representation of the 80s. As in the 1780s, which was the golden age of pirates around the world. But flash forward 200 years, and the world was once again transfixed with military jackets, frilly shirts, and corseted pants. But behind those ridiculous outfits was actually a group of really talented musicians whose musical and artistic aspirations may have peaked at only 2 albums into their career.
I'd say that's pretty fair that they peaked on this album, definitely.
And also, Tom, you could have replaced a number of different Kennedys. I'm glad you chose Bobby.
Yeah, but only one of them was killed by a guy with the name Sirhan.
Okay. Right.
The history buffs and professors of the world will be rejoicing right now, Tom. But, all right, let's throw it back around the room here and get your general impressions. Gents, how was your week?
Oh, man. So, this is one of those albums. I'm like, oh, of course, just I automatically thought I had listened to it. I don't know why. It's just like one of those albums. Like, of course I've heard that. I don't even need to listen to it. Even the songs that I have heard, including the title track Rio, I'm just like, holy shit, this fucking hits.
It does.
This hits. Yeah. I'm just like, God damn. The songs are fully developed. These guys are like 21, 22 years old.
Yep.
It's very mature, dialed in music making. Great use of technology. And like I said in my tweet, the bass lines are so money on the whole album.
I would agree that the bass lines are very money. They're funky in a way that I was not expecting them to be funky. One of the things, though, that you can tell, we've talked about this before, based upon your level in the mix, how much juice you have in the band, this bass player must have been the most juiced bass player of all time because he is louder than the drums. Sometimes he's louder than the vocals. There's a time where other instruments are soloing and the bass line is louder than that. I love the bass playing on it. I think the mixing maybe put it a little too far out front, but I can see why, because it's very interesting stuff.
And this was the remastered version, so they heard the loud bass and like, we're not going to turn it down.
Yeah. They're like, is there a way that we can turn it up and bring a little bit of the bottom out of it? Because it is also mixed kind of like a little trebly for my taste. But again, I'm not trying to take away from the skill of the bass playing. I will say that Duran Duran operates best at a higher BPM. When they get to some of their slower songs, ideally for a good slow song to work, you're going to have great lyrics and an emotive and powerful performance. And Simon Le Bon, he doesn't have a bad voice, but he does not have a powerful voice. And I don't get the sense that he's ever belting out anything. And if I had to pick the major flaw in this album, it's that their lyrics are just not all that great. They're a little trite and sometimes obviously rhymey in a way that is not off-putting, but it's just not super engaging. But overall, I'm not a huge synth pop fan in general.
Sure.
And I do think that they use the synth well, except for there is a sequencer that they use frequently on the album where it's just like, like kind of
the arpeggiator. Yeah.
Not a fan of that. I thought that oftentimes if they had pulled that out and the song was a little bit more sparse and had room to breathe, I would have liked it a little bit more. And I know the technology is relatively new, but there's also times where the sequence is not perfectly in time with the song.
Yes.
And so you're like, ugh.
It totally stuck in my crawl. Once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. I'm like, oh, it's like a 64th note off. It's like barely noticeable, but it's not on the money.
To me, I mark that up to being like ambience. I mean, I think there's a lot of kind of ambient things kind of happening with a lot of these songs if you listen to them hard, and some of the randomness of the Roland Jupiter, which I think is what they used. Yeah, to me, I kind of chalk it up to kind of just a weird ambient noise weirdness.
That's a very favorable viewpoint to take there, Marty. It's a very forgiving viewpoint. Yeah.
It's the most charitable read.
It's out of character for you, Marty, too. Out of character. Usually you're coming in pretty harsh. So this must have been a great week for you.
It's not front and center, so I'm giving it a break.
I honestly wasn't super familiar with Duran Duran. I know the name, and they had a song in maybe the late 90s.
Ordinary World,
which I love. I mean, that's like probably
song.
like, top 50 songs for me. I love that song. And I knew it was Duran Duran, but then when I looked back at the back catalog, I didn't recognize a whole bunch. I recognized Rio, Hungry Like the Wolf, but aside from those, the rest of the album was a bit of a new listen for me. So it was, I would say, interesting. Yeah, I knew going in it was going to be synth pop. It was going to be this new age sound, which is funny, Marty, because I feel like you were on the Adam and the Ants episode, which was probably same era, wearing pirate shirts, new age synth. And Tom, you were on the Gary Newman episode, and both those guys were British 80s synth. So we're continuing our trilogy here of 80s British synth pop. And almost appropriately, I think most of what I knew about Duran Duran was their look, which kind of bothered me. But I read a book this week. It's called Please, Please Tell Me Now by Stephen Davis, the Duran Duran story. And that was not by accident. They leaned hard into the image. So I'm not beating myself up for only seeing these guys as coiffed hairdos and loud pants and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to give myself a little bit of permission there to, or some forgiveness there that that's all I knew about this band.
The 80s almost requires that.
Yeah.
In all genres. Yeah.
Well, and they were one of the bands that leaned into the music video. and took advantage of that medium a whole lot. And frankly, they were good looking dudes. And Simon Le Bon's a very good looking dude. And I can see why they're like, well, we have some gold here. Like, why not just put it out front and center? And there's nothing wrong with that. They took advantage of music videos, I think, in the super theatric music video days where they were still a little low budget. So they probably did it in an intelligent way where they weren't going, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt for these music videos,
They weren't going in debt, but they were spending a ton of money. We'll learn in the story that they kind of hit literally 3 weeks after MTV was started. So they had perfect timing to ride that wave that we'll hear about.
Where else will you see a music video of a guy strapped to a windmill that's going through water, and dunking his head every time he goes around?
I will say to the listeners right now, and actually if anybody's viewing this on YouTube, you'll notice I have a different setting. I just, as of today, arrived from my cross-country trip. So I had a lot of time to listen to this album. I did not have a ton of time to do research on Duran Duran. So I was spending a lot of time on the road.
As long as you come in with plenty of comments on the songs, we're going to be good because I have a lot of history, a lot of story to tell.
He read a goddamn book.
I did.
So that's good.
I'm used to having Rob here as a crutch. He was like, I tracked down Simon Le Bon's mom and read his diaries from grade school. I'm like, all right, yeah, good for you, Rob.
Again, went to the microfiche. So yeah, let's dive into the history. So Duran Duran was truly a band. I know normally, oftentimes in this synthwave pop music of the 80s, I sometimes think of a singular star and then there's a bunch of players behind them. But Duran Duran was truly a band. And normally we pick one person, either the namesake or the focus, but we're going to kind of hit all 5 guys who are in the band today. So having said that, there were 2 main founders of the band, though, a guy named Nick Rhodes and John Taylor. There was a third guy that started out the band with them named Stephen Duffy, but he left the band before they got big, and we'll touch on that in a little bit. But as a quick note, for the lineup of Duran Duran that recorded Rio, the album we're covering tonight, there are 3 guys in the band with the same last name of Taylor. It was maddening. In fact, on the front cover of the book, I drew their names and their instrument underneath them. And whenever I needed help, I would flip to the front and look at which guy with lipstick was the one I needed to talk about. The story really starts with the childhood friendship of John Taylor and Nick Rhodes. Now, John, whose first name is actually Nigel, but who I'll call John for the remainder of the episode, was born in 1960 and grew up in a middle-class neighborhood called Hollywood in Worcestershire, England. And since
I'm going to guess that's not the appropriate pronunciation.
Worcestershire, somebody from our British contingent of listeners, please write in and tell me how I butchered that. So since we've got a lot to cover, we're going to breeze past his childhood and jump right into 1972. And that's because John is 12 years old then, and he sees David Bowie perform as Ziggy Stardust on a show in England that we've mentioned 100 times on this podcast, and that is Top of the Pops. Anyone with a TV was watching Top of the Pops every Thursday evening in England. It was a force and a real trendsetter for pop culture at the time. By age 15, he was completely obsessed with pop music. He loved T-Rex and Bowie, and he would frequently skip school, take a bus into central Birmingham, and spend the entire school day walking around to various record stores in the city center. And fun fact, there was a record store chain in England called Threshold that was owned by the Moody Blues.
I wonder how you passed that off to your parents as a kid. You leave to go to school and you come back with 5 new records. And they're like, what the hell? Oh, they're just giving out records at school? Is that what happened?
He said he would time it so that as the bus was pulling up, he would run down the block so it looked like he hopped off the bus. Smart guy. Or a complete liar. Either way. So John eventually meets this guy named Nick Rhodes. And before anyone corrects me, yes, his name is actually Nick Bates, and he eventually changes it to Nick Rhodes in honor of the Rhodes electric piano. But just to keep things straight, we'll keep calling him Nick Rhodes. So Nick grew up in Birmingham as well, the only child of a pretty affluent couple. And Nick meets John in 1973 through a mutual friend. Now, Nick is 11 and John is 13, and their musical aspirations would proceed side by side for much of their lives. Now, John had never met someone who was as obsessed with music as Nick. Nick's room was covered in posters of David Bowie, Lou Reed, Mark Bolan, Roxy Music, and in addition to that, he had piles of music magazines laying all over his room, like Melody Maker and New Music Express. And Nick was slowly becoming a musical encyclopedia. So in addition to becoming a sponge of the music world, he started adopting this kind of androgynous style that he saw coming out of England at the time from all these pop bands. And he absolutely loved it.
What's great about that is you didn't say Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And so, you already, he's like into T-Rex and Bowie. Right. So he already is kind of in the more alternative kind of scene.
And we're forward a generation as well.
Right.
So Nick and John started going to concerts together as well, and even managed to sneak into a Rod Stewart show back when Rod was a bona fide rock star. Nick was apparently able to sweet talk his way around security and snuck into the front row. Good sign of a very magnetic personality there. Now, Nick was also really into the avant-garde stuff going on at the time, like Roxy Music and Brian Eno, and that kind of dovetailed into Nick's other passion, which was fashion. And I don't think anyone would be surprised to hear that someone from Duran Duran was into fashion. In fact, he used to quote a guy named Brian Ferry, who was the frontman for Roxy Music, when he said, and this is the Roxy Music guy, "Other bands want to wreck hotel rooms. Roxy Music wants to redecorate them." So John...
Rock and roll!
Rock and roll, man! John gets his first acoustic guitar as a present from his parents on his 16th birthday, and he somehow convinces his parents when he completes school to basically fund his efforts to form a band instead of getting a real job. His father had just been laid off from the car factory, and they still agreed to basically give him money while he goes to try to be a rock star.
If that's a British car factory, it's probably a good thing, is what I know about cars.
I was going to say, that's got to be mom is just like, you have to support him, and dad's just drinking in the corner like, God damn it, like, work my ass off, and I got to look at his fucking haircut, puffy ass pants. I did watch a documentary like an hour and a half ago about Duran Duran, and one of the things that Nick was talking about is basically they had this whole plan to become rock stars. And then at one point, he and John were like, oh, we should probably actually learn how to play instruments, right? Like, the plan to be a rock star pre-existed them playing instruments by several years.
Awesome.
That's got to have happened a lot in the history of rock music. I mean, I feel like there's been a lot of stories just on this podcast where people are like, first I wanted to be a rock star, then I learned how to play my instrument. With a lot of like famous bands.
Everybody wants to become a rock star and then they get an instrument. It's just usually not like, and then 4 years later, I buy my first instrument.
Right. So now Nick is only 14 years old. He's still in school. But with an acoustic guitar in hand, John wants to get moving and start playing and making music. But wait, no one ever started a career with an acoustic guitar. So John takes all his albums, sells them, makes 15 pounds, and that is enough for him to buy a cheap electric guitar and amp. And in 1977, he forms his first band called Shock Treatment.
Shock Treatment?
Yes. Like the Edgar Winter album.
I like it.
Of course, I had to bring in Edgar Winter at some point. So while John is out working with his new band Shock Treatment, Nick starts to get into synthesizers. And on his 16th birthday in 1978, his mother buys him an inexpensive and locally produced synthesizer called a Wasp, which are pretty badass if you look at them, but it's odd they don't actually have keys. It's a pad that has keys drawn on it. And you can play it like that. So they're actually pretty hard to find nowadays on reverb.com. You're looking at spending a couple grand on it. So Nick eventually graduates and he is ready to join forces with John and start this new band. So in 1977, John is still playing with Shock Treatment and he has one of these pivotal moments that's described in the book. He's performing with the band in front of what I assume would be his high school friends, high school crowd. And as he strummed the only 3 chords he knew on his cheap electric guitar, there was astonishment on the faces of his classmates, especially the girls. He used to be Nerdy Nigel, the guy who didn't play sports, but now people were looking at him differently. And he thought, even though he sucked, the gig sucked, the band sucked, I need more of this. Which I feel like there's your rock star story that at least we all share.
I mean, Adam, I know you and I can both relate to that. We were just sort of like afterthoughts in high school. And then all of a sudden we played one gig and people were like, oh yeah, hey, how's it going? Yeah. You're not a complete and total fucking suck. Right. All right.
It's sad that, the person that gets the first amount and most amount of attention is someone who can like throw something or like kick something. You know?
So John and Nick are still going out to see all these up and coming bands, really getting influenced by bands like The Clash, Human League, Susie and the Banshees, and perhaps my favorite, the B-52s that they saw at a club called Barbarella's. And get this, the B-52s had to keep stopping the show because of violence in the crowd.
Hey, everybody, stop punching each other. That's not cool.
But that just tells you what, late 70s England was like. You go to a B-52 show and a fight breaks out. Man, people are angsty.
That's why when the B-52s come through Portland, they always play at the zoo.
They play at the zoo?
Yeah. I don't know why. I think the last 3 times they've played here, they've played like in front of the elephant exhibit at the zoo.
Fucking weird.
That is so Fred.
I respect that, honestly. I do.
So it's 1978, and John starts attending the Birmingham Polytechnic College of Art and Design, and it's there that he meets this guy named Stephen Duffy. Now, Stephen Duffy was a songwriter and played the fretless bass. So Steve Duffy, John Taylor, and Nick Rhodes all wind up getting together at school, and they got along really well, and people really dug Nick, the keyboard player. Very carefully curated glam look, just walking around campus. He had on his full regalia, makeup, the hair of the whole thing. And these guys form your typical nameless art college trio and wanted to sound like Velvet Underground, but if they were produced by Giorgio Moroder, who, if you don't know, is a synth and disco guy from the UK that I listened to a little bit. So those 3 guys form a very early version of Duran Duran. Trivia moment, Duran Duran is a reference to a character in the movie Barbarella. There was a guy named Dr. Duran Duran with a D at the end, and they came up with the name after seeing that on TV in 1978. Very art school. But then, in 1979, ironically, the band got a gig as Duran Duran at a famous Birmingham nightclub called Barbarella's. So Stephen Duffy, who was calling himself Stephen Dufay to be super pretentious, was the front man and putting on an overly foreboding vocal affectation. And as the story goes, he announced their first song of the night called Lost Decade as having been inspired by the writer F. Scott Fitzgerald. The crowd groaned loud enough for the entire band to hear them, which I just thought was delightful.
I mean, that sounds like some pretentious shit, though.
Exactly.
Like, yeah.
Again, very art school. So Stephen Duffy, though, quickly ghosts the band and joins another band. And so Nick and John are out a bass player and a singer, and they also don't have a drummer. So enter a guy, another Taylor, Roger Taylor. So Roger Taylor was from the other side of town, from Hollywood, but everyone kind of knew each other because Birmingham is already a small city, and the number of musicians was even smaller. Everybody went to the same clubs, hung out with the same group of people, were all forming bands. So he started out playing bass as a kid. His hands were too small, so he picked up drumsticks instead. And Roger was self-taught, basically playing along to Sabbath and Zeppelin and classic rock. But in the mid-70s, he got way into punk, which helped his chops a lot. The only drummer maybe in a punk band. Actually, I feel like drummers are the only good members or good musicians in a punk band, I'll say.
It's like by law, you know? Like you have to have a good drummer. Your bassist guitar player have to kind of suck.
Right.
Otherwise, it's not punk. Somebody was talking about it. Their favorite new segment. Somebody of our Patreon was saying their favorite new segment is It Punk? And we'll bring it back briefly for right now. Is it punk to have a fretless bass player in your band who can really play? Absolutely not.
Right. It's the least punk thing in the world. Right. So Roger played in the punk scene for a while, but he eventually gets a call from Dexy's Midnight Runners. Yes, the band who would eventually release the song Come On Eileen. So naturally, an up-and-coming drummer, desperately looking for a gig, being approached by a band poised for success, he says no. And after getting that offer, Dexy's Midnight Runner quickly went on to appear on Top of the Pops in January of 1980, and Roger was kicking himself.
I'm going to just relate this to like a very funny story from very early on in the days of playing in the Chop. We'd all like recently moved to San Francisco, and Phil was working for some like hot shit tech startup. And we got a gig on Halloween in like a tiny little shit dive bar. Like nobody was going to come to that show. I think we had like 35 people there or something. Phil's work gives him 2 tickets to the Halloween party at the Playboy Mansion. And we then berate him into turning those tickets down so that he can come and be the second guitar player for our super shit dive bar gig that nobody came to.
I mean, come on, what's Phil going to do at the Playboy Mansion?
You know what?
I mean, jerk off Tommy Lee? Yeah.
I'm sure he would have liked to have found out.
Yes. Oh, man. That is a story I had never heard.
It was no kind of question. We're like, well, you just got to get rid of his tickets, right? And he was like, I'm
sorry, what, guys?
Yeah, I guess I do. Like, yeah, come on, man. There's going to be like 28 people at this show. Come on.
Man, Phil is a good friend. Good band member.
Yeah.
That is impressive. All right, so obviously Roger had some regrets and thought that maybe he missed his one and only chance. But around that same time, he happens to see the drummerless version of Duran Duran playing around Birmingham. They had a rhythm machine, i.e. a drum machine at the time. So he approached the band, they had a couple rehearsals, and things began to gel. Now, up until this point, John Taylor had been playing guitar, but he's one of those founding guys. He was on guitar, but upon hearing the song Everybody Dance by the band Chic, do you know that one? It's like a definite disco anthem. You'd probably recognize it. But he moves over to bass because he noted that the bass guitar in that song came across as the lead instrument. Foreshadowing, so we can definitely hear that on this album. Now, the band is now John Taylor on bass, Nick Rhodes on keys, Roger Taylor on drums, and a guy named Andy Wickett who they picked up to play guitar. Things are feeling solid, so they head into a studio to record 4 songs for a demo. And by studio, I mean a small studio apartment owned by a guy named Bob Lamb, a producer who made the early UB40 demos. So they cut a demo, including the song Girls on Film, which would become one of their most popular songs, a song that was written by this short-lived frontman named Andy Wickett. Now, shortly after cutting that demo, Andy is eventually eased out of the band for being a less than dynamic frontman. Now, there's still some acrimony about this. According to a GoFundMe page for Andy Wickett on his own website, quote, Andy has autism and ADHD and was coerced into signing a piece of paper under the duress of nightclub owners with no legal representation present. 1 week later, Girls on Film was released. So there's still like some shit going on where one of their most popular songs, the song that put them on the map, was written by this guitar player named Andy Wickett, who was with the band for like 3 weeks or something.
And they're saying that he didn't get any money from it?
Bingo. No credit and no money.
Man's got to get a good lawyer. That seems like a slam dunk case.
Yeah, come on, prove it.
Hey, you're right. You're right. Maybe if he had a good case, it'd be settled and he wouldn't be on GoFundMe. Maybe he's just lazy and out of work. I don't know. All right, so now it's November 1979, and Duran Duran books more time in Bob Lamb's studio, and they record another demo tape. They also decide that, hey, we need to land a recording contract, so just go out and get one, right? So they tried just walking into some of these big record companies with no appointments, where they were quickly denied access, like EMI, Phonogram. They did, however, manage to get their foot in the door at Island Records, but were told, don't call us, we'll call you. And then Bob Lamb, this producer, tells them, guys, you're all like 17 and 18 years old. No one's going to listen to you just walking into their studio. You need management before any of these companies are going to talk to you. So the band is still trying to gig as much as possible and get as much exposure as they can. And they're trying to find gigs. They're literally just walking around Birmingham, knocking on doors and pubs and nightclubs to see if they can play. And they come across a place called the Rum Runner, which was Birmingham's biggest nightclub at the time. They were not super familiar with it because it catered to a slightly older and more sophisticated crowd. That is, it was classier than the spit and blood crowds of the punk scene that they were used to playing on. So they get into the club and they meet with a guy named Paul Barrow, who was one of 2 brothers who owned the club. The other brother was Michael, and they had inherited this club from their father. So the brothers had been trying to make this the Studio 54 of Birmingham because they had gone to New York City and seen Studio 54 2 years earlier. So they spent all their time and money trying to make this the hippest, most coke-filled place in Birmingham.
Yeah. but it still would not be even nearly as cool as like a third tier club in Manhattan, right? Like half of Studio 54's attraction is fucking Manhattan, you know?
Right. And also, I imagine like the Columbia drug cartel isn't really popping off in the UK at the time.
Yeah. They're not getting that pure Peruvian marching powder there. Yeah.
Right.
So they meet this one brother, and Nick and John hand Paul a copy of their demo, and he takes it downstairs and puts it on the giant speaker system on the main dance floor of the club, and Paul likes what he hears. And he mentions that he and his brother are looking to get into band management.
That's such a Coke thing to say.
Right.
Just like, hey, yeah, man, so I got this club. I'm really looking to get into management, though. Like, Scott, guys, got all these ideas. Like, I'm just picturing these, like, two coked out sucks who just fell ass backwards into a club and are like, how can I make some real money on this? I'm spending too much money on blow.
So the full band comes back that night and meets with the brothers, and they convince them to let Duran Duran play there in March of 1980. The brothers also agree to let the band use the club as a rehearsal space during the daytime. So pretty soon, they had all come to an agreement. The band's job was to write songs and develop their sound. The Borough's job was to find places for them to play, get them gear, and ultimately get them a record deal. So they played that first big gig at the Rum Runner, and they nailed it. But after some turmoil, they lost another guitarist and a singer that they had recently hired, so they were all still on the hunt for a steady band. All right, now the band members also started working at the club during the day because they're all broke. They're not making any money. So Roger the drummer would bust tables, John the bass player would work the front door, and Nick the keyboardist would also do shifts being the DJ. And the band starts now auditioning people to fill out their lineup, and they're very concerned with the look, as you can imagine. So a lot of great players who didn't look right, and a lot of fashion-forward guys who sucked at their instrument. Now, this is the time of New Romantic. I joked at the top, but think of very flamboyant pirates. Dare I say it, gay pirates. And that's not a slam or an insult because Nick Rhodes is openly bisexual, but as DJ, he would start what he called the Bowie Night, which featured a lot of David Bowie, and a lot of the gay Birmingham crowd would come out to the club. Some folks even came out in the club. It was a big thing. Glam humanity is what he called it. So the band is still on the lookout for musicians, and they take out a big, expensive quarter-page ad in Melody Maker looking for a guitarist. All right, enter yet another Taylor. This time it's Andy Taylor. So Andy Taylor was a guitarist, similar in age to the rest of the band, but he grew up in an old fishing town 175 miles north of Birmingham. The guy grew up on Fresh Lobster, but also very rough hands.
So for him, he's like, Birmingham, bright lights, big city. Right. This is like, oh my goodness, the Mecca of Birmingham. No offense to Birmingham.
Yeah,
I'm sure it's a lovely place.
Yeah.
Actually, I've heard it's not that lovely, but I'm sure it's an okay place.
Jesus. -3 fans on the chart.
You know what? Listen, we all know the flaws of our cities. If somebody talks shit on my hometown, I'd be like,
that's about
totally
right.
Get that. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
We grew up in Delaware.
Yes.
Have at it, folks.
Yeah.
So he grew up in a pretty rough, no-nonsense community, and he left home. This is Andy. He left home at 16, encouraged by his grandmother to take a chance on life and hoping that he could maybe avoid having to work in the brutal commercial fishing markets in the area. So he actually started playing guitar when he was 13, and he was gigging constantly wherever he could. And at 16, this is kind of cool, he gets a gig in a cover band that would play rock music at all of the American military bases in Germany and Italy. So this is the height of the Cold War, so there were plenty of American troops to entertain across Europe. And in 1980, Andy was looking for a new gig, which was around the same time Duran Duran had put their ad out in Melody Maker. And that's a great spot for our favorite segment of the show. We're going to run down Duran Duran by the numbers.
Finally, I was waiting for this. My favorite segment.
All right, here we go. 100, as in 100 million records worldwide since 1978. Now, that was singles and albums. That was from Billboard, and that number was from 2016. So potentially even more. 100 million. That is insane.
Yeah, so it's from 2016, you said?
Yeah.
And so it probably sold like 100 million 5,000 by now.
Add 100 to that. Right.
Yeah.
All right, 2000. That's the amount in US dollars you'll probably pay for a vintage Wasp synthesizer if you can find one. 2 octaves, like I said, it's not actual keys. It's like a plastic pad with pictures of keys on it. Pretty damn cool. The next number is again 2000, but this time it's pounds. In 1981, the band had a big showcase gig in Paris before they really hit it big. In order to make sure they had a good showing, they paid £2,000 to bus in a bunch of regulars from the Run Runner in England, many in costume, full drag, to make sure the still unknown band got a good showing at the club.
Okay, you know what? I talked shit on cokehead shifty managers from before, but that's a good move.
That's
a pro
solid
move. Good on them.
For 2000, it's probably worth it. All right, our next number is 16. It's the number of albums Duran Duran has released over the course of their 46-year career.
It's pretty good.
All right, 2.9 million. That's the number of copies of this album, of Rio, that were sold as of 1991. Man, Wikipedia and some of these other archive sites are struggling, so I assume it's got to be, again, a little bit more than that.
Yeah, that doesn't line up with the 100 million.
Yeah, right?
No, it really doesn't. This is their biggest album by far, right?
That's this album, but they released a ton of singles. In fact, off of this album, there were 3 or 4 that I think also sold a ton. 5,000 is our next number, more pounds. 5,000 pounds was the budget allotted for clothing in the first contract they signed. More on that in a bit. 600. That's the number of gigs that guitarist Andy Taylor had played by the time he was 18 years old. This kid was a workhorse. Some of the contracts for those military bases that he played at called for him and his band to play 6 hours a night. That is insane. And it'll also make you really good.
If your alternative is being out in the North Sea, trying to scrape a living from the fauna of the ocean, I think I'll take a 6-hour gig any day of the week.
Yeah, agreed.
My wrist is a little bit sore after this.
Versus getting washed out to the ocean.
Yeah, I have a fucking peg leg, man. I lost it below the knee from a fishing accident.
And our last number is 30. As in 30 seconds. And that is how long it will take for you to head over to our Patreon page to sign up. And here's the best part. It's completely free for you to sign up and get updates on the podcast, to participate in some of our listener polls, and even vote on some of our upcoming episode ideas. Sure, there is a paid section where you can get some truly hilarious extra content. But either way, Patreon is a great place to dive in with comments and complain along with us. So that link is patreon.com/1001 album complaints. As usual, that link is going to be in the episode notes. All right, so let's get back to the band. So Andy Taylor answers the call and heads to Birmingham to audition for the band at their home base, the Rum Runner. So he shows up, he's not dressed like a pirate, so the band is skeptical. But after hearing him play, they're all pretty excited. Andy would later say that he couldn't believe in the middle of the day that people were hanging out at the Rum Runner and were dressed in silk scarves and blonde dreadlocks and shoes that would have gotten you stabbed in Newcastle. So anyway, Andy gets the offer and he takes the gig. Now, once Andy started rehearsing with the band, he brought a lot of the insight and ideas that he had gotten from playing 600 gigs. He brought that to all the arrangements that they had already set up. And one quote I loved from him was that he told the band, "Don't bore us, get to the chorus," which I thought was hilarious. Pop music instructions. The band is really coming together, but they still don't have a proper frontman. And it just so happens that one of the female bartenders at the Rum Runner has an ex-boyfriend. That ex-boyfriend just so happened to be former child actor, poet, acting student, theater kid, and singer who loved to dress up, a guy named Simon LeBon. Simon had been in show business from a very young age, doing commercials at age 7. He was a choir boy. And at age 17, he finished his school and he went on to study drama and theater at the University of Birmingham. That is, of course, until he got that fateful call from his ex-girlfriend at the Rum Runner telling him that the band was looking for a singer.
See, that's just a lesson to everybody. Make sure your breakups go well. Someday, that easily could have been like, oh, fuck that dude. Right. There's no way I'm giving him a call, asshole. Cheated on me with my best friend. But no, it sounds like things probably ended pretty well.
Burn no bridges.
And also, if you look at all the child actors who have started bands, the success rate is really low. Good for him.
Yeah, right. Good for him.
Corey Feldman's the only one I can think of because I love him.
Right. Oh, I think Macaulay Culkin has a band. I don't know. I'm sure he does.
Sounds like something he would do. Honestly, if you had, like $40 million of Home Alone money, you do whatever the fuck you want. And be like, yeah, sure, I'll finance a band. We're going to tour Europe. This would be great.
So Simon shows up to the club wearing a white dinner jacket over a pair of maroon leopard skin pants, and it was love at first sight. So in addition to kind of matching vibes, Simon also showed up with a notebook full of lyrics and poems, and that sealed the deal. So the band starts practicing. Simon is just jumping in, pulling lyrics out of his notebook and adding them into these instrumental songs that had already been written by the band.
There's a quote from the documentary that I watched where Simon Le Bon is describing this initial meeting where he just sort of got into the band. And he's asking Nick Rhodes, like, what kind of gigs are we going to play? And apparently Nick Rhodes, with all seriousness, was like, we're going to play Madison Square Garden.
Yeah.
And he's like, what? We're going to play Madison Square Garden? And he's like, oh, yeah, no. I mean, not now, but it's going to happen.
Yes.
Like, that confidence really sold me on the band. It's like, okay,
that's awesome.
I think I can be down for this. Yeah.
So as soon as Simon joins the band, the club owners, the Barrow brothers, bought a ton of new gear for the band, new synth, new bass, and the band signs a formal management contract with the brothers and their newly formed production company that they call Tritech Music. And on July 16th of 1980, Duran Duran has their first performance at the Rum Runner that would be called the first official gig from Duran Duran with their classic lineup. Now, by September of 1980, the Barrow brothers were really desperate to land a record deal for Duran Duran and their unique, sexy boy band energy that was coming from the Rum Runner. And there was a lot of competition in the space, though, especially in this new romantic genre that was popping up. You got Boy George and Culture Club, the Spandau Ballet, Depeche Mode, Adam and the Ants. Frilly shirts, floppy hair, designer suits, makeups, ascots were everywhere.
I have to say, the Spandau Ballet, I'm pretty sure that name comes from, it's like a really morbid name. The Spandau Ballet was apparently what in World War I, when bodies would get stuck in the barbed wire and then would keep getting hit by bullets, they would like,
oh my gosh.
And that was what the Spandau Ballet was in reference to. Yeah, it's pretty fucked up. I'm pretty sure that's right. I have not fact checked that recently, but I remember hearing that a while back.
All right, so the band does the familiar route, opening for anyone they can to spread the word. So they toured with a group called Hazel O'Connor. It wasn't a group, it was a singer. She had a backup band, but it was Hazel O'Connor. She had just released an album, very new age pop, new age rock. The band is super poor at this point as they're following her around the country. They could only afford one hotel room. So they'd take turns sleeping in the bed and then rotating out to the van to sleep on equipment or on the seats.
That's not unheard of.
No. And in all honesty, I toured with 5 guys and we got 5 guys in that bed. It's like, come on, nothing wrong with that. Just cram on it. We got a king size.
I went on tour and we went to LA and this person was like, you two can stay at my place. You two can't. Find somewhere else to stay.
Were you one of the 2 that
could? No.
So even though they have no money, they're opening, record execs start taking notice of the band when they see the audience that's forming around Duran Duran, especially the crowds of young, pretty girls who were showing up to all the gigs. And before long, there's a bidding war for Duran Duran between EMI and Phonogram. But the band ultimately signs with EMI mainly because of EMI's ability to push the band overseas in the Americas. Technically, though, the Barrows company, Tritech Music, actually signs the deal with EMI, not Duran Duran. So now EMI gives them a £42,000 advance upon signing, and that money, of course, was used to produce an album, a tour, and some videos, and of course, that clothing budget. All right, now it's time to record their debut, so they head into Abbey Road Studios. And it was terrible, at least for them. The producer, the guy they hired, just couldn't get anything right in the studio. It just wasn't flowing. So they wound up jumping ship and going to Red Bus Studios in West London, and they had the album done in 2 weeks. So they released their first album called Duran Duran on June 15th of 1981, and by early 1982, it hit number 3 in the UK charts, and 2 months later, MTV is launched in the US. Now, Duran Duran, to Tom's point earlier, definitely took advantage of this new medium. The keyboard player, Nick, said that video is to us like stereo was to Pink Floyd. And it didn't take long now for record execs in Los Angeles to take note of Duran Duran, specifically Capitol Records, which was the American arm of EMI. Now, it's kind of funny that nobody at Capitol Records liked the album or the look or the hair, but it had been a few years since an English band had broken through in the US, so they were hoping to push Duran Duran on the American audiences ASAP.
We don't like the music. We don't like how you dress, but you are shockingly good looking. I mean, Simon Le Bon looks like the villain in like an 80s teen movie or something like that. He's just classically good looking.
Strong jaw,
hair.
big nose. Yeah.
Also, you have like Depeche Mode and Tears for Fears and all these other early 80s bands that are, I thought all these bands broke huge in the US. It's kind of interesting to hear
that's a good point.
There would be a struggle, you know?
Now, it could have just been with Capitol. So it could have been that Capitol didn't have a British band that hit.
Depeche Mode was, in terms of like a look and highly stylized, Depeche Mode was kind of more in that vein. But I do think that Duran Duran kind of took the cake when it came to the entire package of an experience, you know, of like super good looking guys singing songs that have a little funk and you can kind of dance to. Also making stuff that's a little bit using new technology and sounds fresh. And so I could see that being a total package that a record executive would glom onto and be like, oh man, I showed this to my daughter and she said it was great. So, all right, yeah, let's get these guys a contract.
All the hard work's done. You just have to start selling the records and pushing the videos. So in September of that year, the band heads to the US for a 6-week tour of the US that would take them from New York to Los Angeles. And while they're in New York, they meet with the guys who invented MTV. And the band was encouraged to make more videos with an MTV audience in mind, because now the band could reach a few million fans a couple times a day. And this is when MTV was desperate for material. So they were asking everybody to make videos.
I feel like they were always on a loop. Even, you know, when I was a kid, I feel like they only had 40 minutes of videos that they would just like play over and over and over and over again. But I'm sure they had even less then.
Simon Le Bon would later say that he and the band saw music videos not just as promotional vehicles, but as a new art form that would accompany and enhance their music. So the band worked their way across the US and plenty of debauchery, and they wind up at the Playboy Mansion where they didn't see Phil, which is a real bummer. They also stayed at a place called the Riot House. Well, it actually was called the Continental Hyatt House, but it got the nickname Riot House because of all the people who would stay there and destroy it. This is the same place where Keith Moon, the drummer for The Who, drove a limo into the in-ground pool one night.
You know, it was interesting hearing Simon Le Bon and Nick Rhodes talk a bit about how kind of naive they said that they were when they first started. It's like when we first started and like got big, like we didn't even know like what cocaine was. And then all of a sudden it was just this like whirlwind of everybody's just throwing money and women and drugs. And you're just like, what the fuck? I was like a nerdy theater kid. Maybe a year ago, I was just like a nerdy theater eccentric kid who was getting shunned in all except for the weird little enclaves within my working class town. And now I'm the toast of the town. And, you know, here's drugs, here's women, here's alcohol, fucking party, wreck the hotel. It was interesting to hear them say that in the context of them making another record in like 2005 or something like that. And like, we actually feel like we felt when we were originally a band, because now we all have families and our shit's all together, and we're not going to fall down this spiral of debauchery because it's the first time we've ever seen it. Like, we can be more focused on the music, which I thought was an interesting approach because you don't necessarily think of that.
And look what happened to like Keith Moon and John Bonham, you know, the original Hotel Destroyers, you know?
Yes.
They're fine, right? They're still making music today, I think. New age stuff, right?
right.
They're, I believe they're pastors now.
Right.
Big evangelical pastors.
They're writing all the new hymnals.
Right.
Yes.
So after an action-packed 6 weeks in the U.S., they head back to England. And in February of 1982, the label is clamoring for a follow-up album. But this time around, as quickly as it had come, New Romantic is out and a rock-edged dance pop is in. The label even said they wanted something like, quote, Led Zeppelin and Talking Heads have a baby. So, which I guess you could kind of...
No, that sounds stupid.
Right.
Record executives are idiots. That sounds terrible.
So now the band already had a good number of songs ready to go. And with a budget from EMI of £65,000, they go back into the studio. And that brings us finally to tonight's album, and that is Rio. Now, 4 of the songs that appear on Rio had already been recorded the prior August in one of EMI's studios. All the other songs, with the exception of The Chauffeur, which is the last song on the album, had already been arranged as well. So it was not an arduous task. They were in and out of the studio very quickly for the second album. So they go into Air Studios in London, which was founded by George Martin and had some of the newest and hottest tech at the time. Nick, the keyboard player, was really into learning all the science and mechanics of record making, and so he was always the first in the morning and the last to leave in the evening. And something else I found interesting, and I think I spotted where it is on the album, Roger the drummer said he wanted to do a mix of actual acoustic drums and some electronic drums. So what he did was to put electronic drum pads only on his toms. So the kick, the snare, and the hi-hat were actually mic'd. And then when he goes to the toms, you get the doo-doo-doo-doo-doo, you know, that kind of like laser shotgun sound. Kind of cool. The album Rio also had a $200,000 budget for videos from EMI. They went to Sri Lanka to record a bunch of videos for the album. In total, they made videos for 6 of the 9 tracks on this album. Pretty badass.
They're going for it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I like how they probably spent, 20% of the budget just getting to Sri Lanka.
Oh yeah.
Like that, I mean, that's
right.
It's like it's like when Adam Sandler makes a movie and he's like, "How about it's in Kenya? I just want to spend 8 weeks in Kenya on somebody else's dime." That sounds pretty good. Yeah.
They have to helicopter one band member at a time.
You can't carry them all. All right, gents, what do you say we jump into some of these sweet tunes?
Oh yeah, can't wait.
Let's do it.
All right, first up is the title.
You could nail the first minute of this song. You will have the crowd for the rest of the show. It hits hard, 142 BPMs. It's kind of cooking, and it hits. It hits. It goes. It makes you move. It's a hard-hitting, awesome rock song.
Marty, I will 100% agree with you. And not even if just you're a live band. This as the first track on your album, I was like, I want to hear more. This has a feel to it that it's funky, but it's also a little angular. There's such a difference between the verse and the chorus. Brightens up so much in the chorus. I really do think that I had heard this song before, of course, but all that had stuck in my head is just, her name is Rio.
Heard but never listened. Yeah.
Yes. That's the least interesting part of the song. It's not even a bad chorus, but it's way less interesting than the verse. I will say the lyrics are not all that great. What's he said? You know you're something special and you look like you're the best. Like,
That's pretty.
It's just a dumb.
But you know what they don't do is they don't have any cringy, pervy, weird lyrics like a lot of other bands had in this time. Their lyrics aren't great, but they're not terrible. They're right in the middle.
That's a good point. There was never a point in the album where I was just like, ugh.
Right.
Ugh,
Yeah.
There's no Bon Jovi moments from Slippery When Wet. Yeah, right.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, I will say that this song, and I mentioned it at the end of last week's episode when this album was announced, that I don't think I really recognized Rio as a song till I was around 17 years old. And that's because the band that Tom and I were in high school, our parents let us at 17 years old on Sunday evenings go to a bar a couple miles away from where we grew up where there was a cover band playing, and we would go in at like 11 o'clock and we would play their set breaks. And I remember the bass player, who, Tom, you might have even taken lessons from.
I took lessons from him. Oh, yeah. He was a beast.
He had I think it was a Spectre.
He had a Spectre. It's the reason why I have a Spectre. Yeah.
And
Oh.
they crushed this song. I remember them playing this, or it wasn't the first time for them, but the first time I'd heard it, and it was them playing it, and just watching the bass player was just awesome. So yeah, this bass sticks out. It's obviously the lead instrument, aside from the voice that we mentioned earlier. Yeah, just a badass tune.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of mix level, it's the vocals and the bass is just underneath the vocals, and then there's a pretty big gap between the guitar, the drums, everything else.
And the synth pads and stuff.
Yeah. And for good reason, though. It's a funky bass line. I think it uses the tritone in there at one point. Get that little, like, nice, nasty note in the bass line. Yeah. I was very pleasantly surprised with this song. Again, I was expecting that I would know it. And then I heard it, and I was like, oh, man.
Same here. I was like, oh, another album I'm going to hate because I've already heard it all before. And then I got in and I was like, holy shit, is this jazz legend Stanley Clarke subbing in on bass here? Like,
if it was Stanley Clarke, he'd be all on the upright and he'd still be killing it that way. Yeah.
One cool note I found about the intro noise on this song, this thing comes fading in the intro. They were dropping metal rods onto the open strings of the piano, and then they took that and reversed it. And so what you get is this like swell in the beginning that it sounds like a synth, but it's actually that noise just reversed.
You could tell it's in reverse. It's like,
yeah.
It's got that weird.
That's pretty cool.
It's cool. I will definitely say it's cool. I would say that I can understand wanting to start your album with a soundscapey thing like that, but when I was trying to experience the song on the focus list and not in an album context, it did seem like the intro was a little overwrought. And I was like, just kick in and get to the goddamn song.
Right.
Which I'm sure on the radio they just did.
Opening track, like Tom said earlier, it's like, if you have a song like this, it's got to be your opening song. If you put it in any other part of the album, it's not in the right place.
Yeah, thinking about what, I feel like Hungry Like the Wolf, honestly, would have been the only other viable option as the lead-off song on the album. But I think they went with the right choice here with Rio.
Yeah, I feel like Hungry Like the Wolf is a nice payoff, a couple of songs in to get you back to that super pop sensibility. So very intelligent choice. And I would say that overall this album does seem well thought out. I don't get the sense that this was something that was tossed off, even though they recorded it very quickly. Like you said, they had a plan already. And that's how you can execute an album in like 2 weeks, beginning to end, is you have a plan when you go in and you're not just like, well, let's figure some shit out.
Right, let's write some songs now.
No, we know what we're going to do.
The more I read about this album, the more I appreciated the album cover as well. So you're talking about a band that is super visual. All of these guys are gorgeous. They've got on their outfits, their makeup, their hair. And instead of putting the band, like the most photogenic people in the world, instead of putting them on the album cover, you have this kind of like stylized 80s woman.
Yeah, it's like pop art or something.
Like you assume that's Rio. I mean, it looks like a Vidal Sassoon 1980s hairspray commercial, but what an awesome idea.
It also kind of looks a little bit like the old school Japanese, like Edo area type of geisha pictures that they would make.
Very sharp.
Yeah. Very art school approach to things. Like, again, very thought out. They didn't just say like, all right, well, let's all go stand in the corner and we'll take a picture and everybody look in a different direction.
Go to the railroad tracks.
Yeah, let's get a trash bag and write slippery when wet on it.
Yeah.
Just write.
How about this? We're going to hire a Native American.
Right. Yeah.
All right, let's move on to the next song that we put on the...
For this one, I was like, okay, this song has a very nice groove to it. And I think this is the song, which you mentioned, Adam, that has a drum machine and live drums kind of interspersed or playing together.
Yeah, right. Some of the drum hits are electronic.
My biggest complaint about this song is I just don't think the chorus is very good. I think we talked about this like 100+ episodes ago on the Bee Gees episode that we did for Trafalgar, where just generally speaking, if your chorus melody is going down, it just saps a lot of the strength of the song. Choruses are supposed to be a peak, and they're supposed to come out of the peak and settle back in, but they kind of go down and then come back up for the verse. And that's just, it's not a good modality to write a song in. That's why I thought the chorus was just a little disappointing. But that being said, I think that the melody of the chorus is a good melody. I just don't think it should be used as a chorus melody. That lonely in your nightmare, let me in. It's not a bad melody.
Now, is that a bass or a synth that's doing the ba-da-doo-da-da-doo part?
Ooh, I don't know.
I think it's a fretless bass, yeah.
It is. Okay, yeah.
Okay.
I like the bass playing in the song a lot also.
Did they go find that guy that they threw out of the band earlier, or that ghosted on the band to play a little fretless for him?
That's a good point, right. Yeah, this song I had never heard before, and it wasn't by any means my favorite, but it was a different flavor that I hadn't experienced from the band. To me, it almost felt like a ballad, but with fast drums. So it was kind of an interesting mix there. And yeah, Tom, I couldn't put my finger on why it wasn't super compelling, but your note about the chorus dropping in pitch is super interesting. And I think that's probably why this was not as strong as a lot of the other offerings on the album.
Yeah, it almost seems like there's just a disconnect between the verse and the chorus, and they don't flow into each other very well because the verse is kind of grooving. And then you sort of get that.
I like that about it. I like that it's just not normal thing you'd expect. To me, that is like catchy in a weird way.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. This song also helped me appreciate the engineering and the mixing on this album. I thought everything in this song specifically, I don't know why this song specifically, but I thought everything was so well balanced in terms of the instrument. There are albums that stick out in my head where if you have headphones on and you close your eyes and you think about an instrument, you can pick it out. Somehow nothing is buried in the mix.
Everything is like spaced out or something. So it's like occupying different spaces in your headphones.
Yeah. So like just think about the hi-hat. Boom, you found it. And it's not overpowering. Think about the tom, the bass, the synth fill, whatever it was. So this song, for whatever reason, really stuck out as highlighting just how well produced and mixed this album is. All right, we're going to move on to another huge hit. My God. This song is Hungry Like the...
So again, I'm like, this song is fucking awesome.
Yeah, it really is.
It's a really good song.
And Tom, we talked about lyrics, and I think this actually has some cool lyrical play in it where they kind of talk about like, in touch with the ground, I'm on the hunt after you, a scent and a sound, I'm lost and I'm found. They'll say that one time, and they'll say, smell like I sound, I'm lost in the crowd. And they kind of like have some cool wordplay with the lyrics that kind of change as they go through each verse, which I think is kind of creative and the best kind of lyrical thing that they do on the album.
I would agree with you. I think that these lyrics seem well thought out and worked, and to the point where they are, you know, you have to work something a lot to get nuance in there. Nuance doesn't just come on your first draft in 99% of cases. So I would agree. I think that this song is extremely successful on all fronts. And Adam, you brought up the, get to the chorus, don't bore us line earlier. The catchiest part of the song is that do 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 do
Totally.
do do,
Yeah.
do. And they get that in there so early that
Like 10 seconds,
that you're like, oh, well, I'm kind of hooked already. I'm willing to wait for the chorus because you gave me this nice little melodic touch in the middle of the song. It's a beautiful harmony that they do over it too. It's very smart. It's a very well put together song, but this is the song where the sequencer was just a little out of time.
Yeah. Right.
Oh, no. And it's also mixed kind of loud in this song. Like the sequencer is kind of high up in the mix. Mm-hmm. And I just thought that if they just took that out, it would have been a better song. Just take the sequencer out in general. Because I do think that the sparseness of the songs is not inherently a bad thing because each of the parts plays off of each other very well. And then you kind of got this just slathered over everything. I didn't think that worked particularly well.
I loved the guitar in this song. Yeah. It is so tasty. Just that riff of jan, jan, dan it, dan it. Like there's a rest in there.
Yeah, it's kind of like T-Rex. It's like boom, gat that, boom, gat.
Yes, it's super purposeful. Every note and every pause is meant to be there. A lot of times in bands, it's just kind of like, well, I'm sort of playing this thing, and he's not sort of playing anything.
Right, I'll just kind of strum the chord a little bit or something. But this is really well thought out.
I do have a question for you all. At the end of the song, as the song is fading out, is there sex sounds like as the song is fading out at the very end?
I did see a note in the book talking about sex and orgasm noises somewhere on this album. And I think you may have found it. I agree. Yeah.
It's got to be that.
I think that's the one.
The song begins with like a girl giggling, which apparently is one of their girlfriends.
Right.
And then Axl Rose showed up at the studio, and then all of a sudden...
right.
I heard you need some moans.
Right.
God.
That is, I'm interested to hear that they actually mentioned that there was the sound of like orgasms on the record. As it was fading, I was listening to it very loud, and as it was fading, I was like, I recognize that sound. Yeah.
All right, we're going to move things on to the next song. This is kind of cool.
For the first minute, I was like, this might not be my favorite song, but the music is so good. And one of the things that I like about this song, and it's funny, I was having a conversation with my friend I was playing music with over the weekend, who's a synth player. And he's like, one of the most important feature of a synthesizer is the pitch bend. And one of the key features of someone who is good at playing the synthesizer is being able to master the pitch bend while you're playing. And this song has the coolest, synthy pitch bend stuff and great ambience.
I did feel like the first 2 seconds of the song sounds like I just entered into a dungeon in The Legend of Zelda or something like that. Like that synth sound in space by itself. I don't think it aged all that well, but once the whole band starts going, it's pretty good. I do think, again, that sort of unnecessary sequencer is a little too loud in there. And once I heard it in Hungry Like the Wolf, I just could not help but noticing it in every single song.
Every listen now is ruined by that, right? When I first heard this song, I had definite dentist office vibes. I was taken back to the Police song, Wrapped Around Your Finger. I think that's the song where it kind of has this weird kind of ambient thing going on. And initially, I wasn't a huge fan of this, but the more I listened to it through the week, that major to minor thing they do, where they sing the chorus straight and then they do this, or maybe it's a diminished thing or something. It is just an awesome change.
There are certain bands that are like feel bands, and they're about a vibe or about the individuals doing something over not super complicated baseline material. Mm-hmm. And then there's bands that the baseline material is very well thought out and very well constructed. And I do think that this band's baseline material is well thought out and constructed. It's not about any one of them being a virtuoso. It's not about any one of them shredding, even though the bass player does kind of shred. It's not any one of them bringing a highly stylized performance or anything like that. It's just about all the parts fit together very well.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the hallmark of a lot of the music that I like is that, and you talked about Talking Heads earlier. Talking Heads are very much like that. It's everybody just plays the part and the parts all fit together really well. I'd say this is an album that really highlights that style of music in a very positive way.
All right, we're going to move things on to the last song on our focus list. This one is called The Chauffeur.
Glides are moving, oh, looking for a new place to drive. You sit beside me, so newly charming, sweating dewdrops glisten fresh in your side. When the sun drips down, bedding heavy behind the front of your dress, all shadowy lined, and the droning engine throbs in time with your beating heart.
I put this song on the focus list as my low light when I first send out the focus list to the group here. And premature, I will say, because this song, after I sent the playlist out, this might be my second favorite song on the album. It is so weird. It is so vibey. It is so out of left field. It is so not pop. And I really appreciate that they took a swing on the last song, and it is just out of left field.
You like that minute and a half ocarina outro that you get from Simon Le Bon? That was a bit much for me.
All right, a bit much, yes.
I thought the song initially same vibe. I first listened, I'm like, okay, it feels incomplete. And then around 2 minutes, when the whole band comes in, I'm like, okay, this song fucking rules. And also, this is the most, like, you needed a really British sounding song on every British album. And I think this is the one.
Like a Doctor Who. It's like a Doctor Who song, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
Totally.
Yeah.
Marty, you are making me think about it in a new light because this is a pretty British song. I gotta say, it was not my cup of tea. But if you were asking me to put together the song that I thought was the least successful, I think I would say it is this. They were trying something, so I give them a lot of credit for the trying. I just don't necessarily think that they nailed it for my tastes. But again, what the fuck do I know?
Also, you talked earlier, Tom, about like the singer not necessarily like really pushing himself. He really pushes himself on this song towards the middle and is really kind of getting out there. Almost to Morrissey levels, but not quite.
Well, yeah, maybe that's why I didn't like it all that much.
All right, I hate it now. Now, Tom, I will totally agree with you that I don't necessarily think they nailed it, but it's so avant-garde and like art house. Like this is where that whole they were all art students, and they convinced the producer, like, let me just be really weird on one track. All right, fine, we'll put it at the end. You get 4.5 minutes or 5 or whatever it is.
Yeah, it is kind of a long song.
Yeah, it's on the long side, yeah.
It overstays its welcome a bit.
I will agree with that.
I didn't, at the end of it, be like, oh my God, stop the foot. Like, it was fine. It took a long time to get going. And when it got going, I didn't feel like it really ever hooked me. You have to do a lot if 2 minutes into the song, you finally kick in. That kick in's got to do something for me. And it just didn't really do much for me.
Don't bore us, get to the chorus. They're violating their own prime directive here.
Yeah, seriously.
Right.
All right, gentlemen, what do you say we get to the most important part of the show? And that's where we all cast our votes on whether or not this album, Rio, actually deserves to be on the list of the 1001 albums you must hear before you die. So I am going to send it over to Marty first.
For me, this is a hard yes. I didn't even have to listen to more than just Rio to figure that out. This is probably the first album that I've done on this podcast. I thought I knew, but I didn't really know. And I've ended up enjoying it so much that it will now be in I know it's happened to everyone here, all the hosts and panel members here. It will be one that I will now recommend to people and listen on my own time and not when I have to for homework. So definite yes. Loved it. Great album.
Nice. All right. That's a yes from Marty. Tom, what do you got?
I am going to give it a less enthusiastic yes than Marty. He gave it a hard yes. I'll give it a soft yes. I liked it, and it does sound like the 80s, and it happened early in the 80s, and I do think that they were a very influential band. So I will give it to them, not just on the influence. I enjoyed the album. Oftentimes, I try to find some other reason that you need to hear the rest of the album and not just the big hits. And I would say that the rest of the album is pretty fucking good. And so listen to Duran Duran's Rio. It's certainly going to be worth your time. It is not an overly long album where I'm going to be like, oh my God, you have to listen to like 42 minutes of this album. How can you possibly make it through? It'll be easy. Listen to it. You'll enjoy it. And then, you can be that guy who's like, oh, you think you know Duran Duran. Trust me. Give it a deep listen.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, that's a yes from Tom, so technically my vote doesn't matter, but I am sick of listening to this album. That has a tendency to happen with heavy synth and new age and new wave and new romantic, but I do like this album a lot. I am tired of it. Like Tom said, you probably listen to this a ton. I probably honestly listened to this album 30 times this week, and it's awesome. The hits are awesome. Some of the B-sides are great. This band has been around forever and has definitely left their mark on the world in terms of music videos and fashion and mixing all of those into a product. But the product has substance to it. And so I think these songs are great, and it's a yes for me. You should go listen to this album. So there you have it. Congratulations, Duran Duran. You deserve to be on the list. I know you were all waiting for us to vote on you, so congrats.
And they're all still alive, right?
They are.
This wasn't one of those, and then at 47,
So they went through a breakup in, I want to say 85, which is when was it Farm Aid or Live Aid in Philadelphia? But they were all starting to fray because they were tired of touring with each other and touring like rock stars over the course of 3 or 4 world tours. But they are back together and they're doing things again. So,
Well, I think everybody but Andy Taylor, one of the nominal brothers Taylor, is not back.
One of the many Taylors.
Yes, they just got another Taylor to replace him with. They're fine.
all right, there you have it. So remember, folks, we've got a week to prepare and about an hour to share. So let us know if we got it right, if we got it wrong, or if I completely missed the double-decker bus on my telling of the Duran Duran story. You can do that by sending an email to 1001albumcomplaints@gmail.com. And speaking of emails, I've got the mailbag today. But before we get into that, I want to do a couple quick corrections that have come in from our listeners, specifically about an episode I hosted. So, on our Bon Jovi episode, that was for the album Slippery When Wet. In that episode, I made some references to a band who was playing in and around the Bruce Springsteen scene in Asbury Park, New Jersey. That band is called the Asbury Jukes, with a J, like jukebox. I was saying Dukes throughout that entire episode. So we had some listeners write in to correct me, so I appreciate that.
I like your name better, Adam.
Now you're going to get corrected on saying Asbury.
Yeah.
Ashbury.
It's the Asbury Jukes, okay?
Also on that episode, I said that in April of 1985, Van Halen broke up. I should have specified that David Lee Roth left the band in April of 1985, which is kind of the same as breaking up, right?
Yeah, that's some dork shit.
Come on. Unless we're considering Van Hagar to actually be canon, which I don't think.
We are not.
Thank you. All right. So maybe I'll retract.
David Lee Roth, the guy in the band that's not named Van Halen, still somehow owns the Van Halen name. That's how good of a frontman he was. Fucking Diamond Dave killed it.
All right. So, I'm going to retract my retraction. So now let's get into the actual mailbag here. Our first email comes from Becca in Canada. Oh, God. Canada. All right. Becca, I'm not sure if you heard.
The Guess Who episode hasn't come out yet.
I'm not sure if you heard our Guess Who episode, but you might not want to listen to that. If you did hear that and you are still listening, we love you and we love Canada and all of our friends in the Great White North. But anyway, Becca writes, I just wanted to thank you for the episode on Abbey Road. I normally don't listen to podcasts, but I needed something to listen to at my summer job, and I wanted to educate myself. I'm 23 years old, and I've always been aware that the Beatles are really important, but not really why or how, and I really only knew about 5 songs. After listening to 4 hours of you guys talking, my God, Becca, you were a saint. You didn't know about the Beatles, but you listened to 4 hours of us go on about them. But she says she actually appreciated the length because her workday went by faster. I laughed a ton and learned a lot and was inspired to go and listen to Abbey Road beginning to end for the first time on the drive home. And wow, I cried when it ended. I've been going through their other albums ever since, and more I'm able to recognize their influence everywhere in all the other music I listen to. Thanks for the details you guys highlighted and the way you talked about how they harmonize and how stuff was recorded. Also, I loved hearing the details of some of their story, so very interesting. I'm obsessed. 10,000 stars. Thank you for initiating this musical journey and newfound appreciation for music. We love you, Becca, and we appreciate you taking time out of your day to send us a note. And we're super happy that we're introducing you to new music, even if it's 45, 50 years old.
Seriously, though, welcome to an amazing journey of listening to the Beatles catalog. It's going to be fucking great.
Yeah.
It's really awesome.
All right, our next email comes from listener Bill from right here in Pennsylvania, my home state. So Bill says, I enjoyed the Beck Odelay podcast and was surprised that no one mentioned the Beatles did it first on Beatles 65 with I'm a Loser. You're probably right there, Bill, so well done. And since I live in New Hope, Pennsylvania, I appreciated the mention of hometown band Ween, which I didn't realize Ween actually comes from New Hope, Pennsylvania.
How did you not realize that?
Everyone
You've mentioned
knows
it like 8 times on this podcast already.
Oh, all right. Well, maybe I wasn't on those. Or is that sarcasm? God damn it, I don't know with you guys.
No, it's not sarcasm. We definitely have mentioned them many times.
All right, well, I'm going to cut that. No.
It's literally the only thing I know about Ween.
It's the only thing I know about New Hope.
So Bill goes on, I'm a boomer, high school class of 74, and was a fan of Graham Parsons and the Flying Burrito Brothers in real time. It was great to hear your take on it, and I get the album doesn't pass the test of time, but in its moment, It was raw and edgy and an alternative to the smoothness of CSNY, America, Poco, and other pre-Eagles country rock. He goes on to say, I was heavily influenced in the 90s by WXPN. We all know WXPN here. Sidebar, that is the independent and non-commercial radio station for the University of Pennsylvania here in Philly. They've got a lot of cool genres and different formats and stuff. And Bill goes on and says, I feel the same way about Steve Earle, another act that I guess doesn't pass the test of time, but it was a refreshing listen at the time, and I will continue to enjoy Guitar Town. Now, Bill closes out his email by saying, lastly, I really appreciated the mention of Arthur Russell and his cello contribution to Psycho Killer in the Talking Heads episode. My brother is Tom Lee, Arthur's partner until his death until 1992, and has been a driving force in getting his music into the world posthumously. Awesome.
That's really cool.
That's awesome. Yeah. Arthur Russell is amazing. Yeah,
I didn't know anything about him. I went and listened to some of his 1985 album called World of Echo. Very cool, very avant-garde. It was a nice palate cleanser for sure after listening to Rio 30 times this week.
Yeah.
So anyway, Arthur Russell is out there on Spotify, and most of the material was released posthumously by his partner Tom. So a very cool musical legacy. So check it out. Thanks to Bill for that email, and everyone go check out Arthur Russell on Spotify. Very cool. All right. Again, if you got something to say, drop us an email at 1001albumcomplaints@gmail.com. And next up, we got to figure out what we're listening to next week. So I'm going to throw it over to Tom, who's got his hand on the Albinator.
Thank you, Adam. I have the Albinator. It is completely decked out. Feather boas, mascara. The pants are the puffiest pants you've ever seen in your entire life, and yet somehow they're still tight around the ass. It's really impressive.
It's the corsets, man. It's the corsets.
Yes. We're going to pull that bad boy over here and give that wheel a spin and see what we will be listening to next week. So without any further ado, drum roll, please. We will be listening to Marty. I think we've got a new favorite for you. The album is Antichrist Superstar, and the artist is Marilyn Manson.
I'm going to get one of my ribs removed for that episode.
Good Lord. I haven't done any research on Marilyn Manson yet, but I'm pretty sure he's a gigantic piece of shit. That's going to be a fun one, because the music, I'm pretty sure, also sucks. So we're going to be able to hold no punches back.
I can't wait.
The one song I know, right? Beautiful. Is Beautiful People on this album? Do we know?
No, I believe that's on... Is that on Smells Like Children? No, Beautiful People is on this one.
Okay,
Smells Like Children is the one I believe with Sweet Dreams on it.
Oh,
I owned
that's
Smells
right.
Like Children when I was young and really fucking stupid. So.
All right, well, there you have it. Something to look forward to. Maybe not. I don't know. We'll see. But you've got your homework assignment for next week, everyone. It is Marilyn Manson's album, Antichrist Superstar. And that is going to do it for us here today at 1001 Album Complaints. I'm Adam.
I'm Marty.
And I'm Tom.
I never think of something to say. Boosh.
You got to say it twice. Boosh, boosh.
Boosh, boosh. Thank you.